I know you've heard from the other witnesses. Perhaps you may have even found their accounts to be fascinating. Seems to me like they were really hard to believe. I guess I would have difficulty accepting them too if I hadn't been so close to the events myself. And so I'm going to try and tell you just what happened. I think you ought to know I came from a very humble beginning after being scattered by the wind with many other flax seeds. I grew to be a slender flax plant with beautiful little blue flowers, if I do say so myself. It's difficult to match the natural beauty of the flowers of the earth, even when those flowers grow on plants that you would probably call weeds. You have flowers just like me out there in the field growing with the grass. I wish I could have grown up out there, but you probably would have cut us down. It's amazing, however, what changes can take place that turn the common into something precious, the average into something valuable, the simple into something elaborate. And that's what happened to me. Yes, I did start out as a simple weed growing in the fields, but I was selected and carefully prepared for a very special purpose. I wondered as I grew if I would ever amount to more than what I was, how excited I was when I was picked, literally, to be woven into linen. That's what they do with some flax, you know. They turn us into linen. It may surprise you to know that linen can be as fine and smooth as silk. It can be as beautiful and have a sheen like the most beautiful cloth that you can find. But becoming a piece of linen was just the first part. Once the skilled hands of the spinners and weavers were done with us, there could be any number of ways that we could be used. Many pieces of linen are used to adorn tables and palaces during grand banquets. Some linen is just hung on the wall so that its simple beauty is there for all to see. Some pieces of linen are used to make clothing, but only for those who can afford us. Personally, I had hoped to be in a garment that would be wrapped around a king or a queen. And I guess I have to admit I've always had high expectations. After all, I started out as a simple weed growing out in the field, and I guess my hopes were really too high. Actually, whatever hope I had was crushed. A man named Joseph, I believe he was from Arimathea, came into the shop and asked for a piece of linen. At first, I was excited. I knew it was my turn to be sold because I was on the top of the stack. Well, this man, Joseph, was well dressed. I assumed he was a person of high position. I assumed he was rich. I found out he was a member of the council, which made him a leader among the church officials. Knowing that, I thought, boy, I'm going to adorn a fine table, or I'm going to be hung in his house for all to see how beautiful my weave was made. I could picture myself draped over the noble body of this man, or even his wife. I knew I was going to become famous. And I was right, but in a very wrong way. You see, this fellow Joseph told the shopkeeper he was looking for linen to be used as a burial shroud. Can you imagine the cold, drafty, damp feelings that shot through my threads at that moment? Here I had seen myself as an important part of the life of nobility or royalty, only to find out that I would be wrapped around a body and buried away in a dark, damp, cold tomb, never to be seen again. How devastating. I wish they would have just left me out in the field to die and go to seed. At least then I would have served some useful purpose. But to be stuck away in a hole in the ground, how dreadful. Well, Joseph paid the bill and took me from the shop. Shortly, we met up with another man named Nicodemus, another member of the council. He and Joseph were a little at ease, and they were sneaking around in the shadows, hoping no one would see them. What they were about to do could have gotten them into all kinds of trouble with the other members of that council. Nicodemus had bought 100 pounds of myrrh and spices. It was the custom to wrap a body in linen and place spices in between the layers, and they never asked, what if I'm allergic to that stuff? No one bothered to think about me. My hopes were gone. My usefulness had turned into uselessness. And then it got even worse. You can't imagine how worse it could become. They put me on the ground so they could get the body I was to be wrapped around, and that's when it got worse. The body was hanging on a cross. I was to wrap the body of a criminal who had been executed. Why didn't they just toss him into the big hole in the ground where they threw the other criminals who had been crucified? After all, criminals weren't entitled to a burial. What made this man special? He didn't look special. He just looked dead. Then they got him down off the cross and they started wrapping me up. Remember, I did tell you, I did have hopes of serving nobility or at least being wrapped around a king. And then, of course, I had given up all of that hope. I did say that, didn't I? Well, I don't know how to get you to understand this, but I'll tell you just the way it was. And you can wrestle with all of the confusion after all. That's what I had to do. Here's what happened. When the body of that crucified man touched me, a sensation passed through all my threads. It was as though I was being fused into a solid mass. Strength beyond the strength of even the finest linen, with a sheen beyond the finest silk. Now, that's not the feeling you would expect to get being touched by a dead body, don't you think? It was clear this was not the body of an average criminal. There was something special here, something with power and purpose. There was no doubt he was dead, and yet there was this sensation that made me feel alive and strong while he lay dead and weak as I was wrapped around him. If you're finding this hard to understand, imagine how I felt. All of a sudden, I felt that being able to touch this man was far more important than any other use I ever could have possibly imagined. I didn't understand it, but it was there. I knew it. I could feel it through every fiber of my being. Finally, I was completely wrapped around him. I pressed tightly against his lifeless flesh. There was no movement. There was no breathing. There was no trace of a heartbeat. He was indeed without life. How sad. I had no idea who this man might have been, but if in death he had the power to affect me the way he did, can you imagine what he could have done for people while he had been still alive? Even though I was so confused, there was a sense of confidence and security as I was allowed to hold this precious body resting in death. Even though he was truly dead, there was no doubt about it, there was a feeling that it wasn't over yet. A feeling that there was more to what was going to happen. An excitement that replaced the usual depression you would feel at a time like this. I no longer saw myself as a useless rag wrapped around a corpse. Rather, I felt that I was being used for a very special purpose, even though I might not ever understand. We were moved into a new grave and laid to rest. Then the grave was tightly sealed by a huge stone. It was dark and quiet, and everything felt so empty. And we were there, just laying there for a couple of days, and then we were lying there as still as death itself. And something moved. I felt a movement. Well, could have been another earthquake. There had been a lot of earthquakes. What else could move inside a grave? But then there was a tugging and straining against me. It was as though breath had re-entered his body. There was a rhythmic movement. The heart was beating again. That was it. He was alive. And then, just like that, I was there alone on the slab, still in place. I was still all wound up. I was still filled with spices, but the body was gone. Something beyond imagination had occurred, something I cannot explain. I can only tell you this. It happened. And a simple flax plant transformed into linen had been transformed into a shroud of life. I didn't give life to that crucified one, mind you. I was only allowed to serve him by holding him only as long as he chose to be held. And now, so will it be for you. He is free from the death that held him, and so will it be for you. I used to think death was the end. Obviously, it's just the beginning. Amen.